Thank you all for joining us today for another episode of our podcast, Moving to Value Unscripted. My name is Dr. John Rodas, and I'm a recovering ex-hospital president and am proud to be the president of the Moving to Value Alliance. The Moving to Value Alliance, MTVA, a 501c3 nonprofit, is a multi-stakeholder grassroots organization whose purpose, put simply, is to foster a community that aims to create a value-based healthcare ecosystem with high-quality outcomes at a reasonable cost for plan sponsors and their members, beneficiaries, or employees. Our community has grown substantially over the past few years. We started in Connecticut, but now have nearly 1,000 members from more than 40 states all over the U.S., and our members include many value-based influencers. I want to thank our members who make this presentation possible. We'd like to give special recognition today to our trade member, Sowen Health. We're joined today by my fellow board members, Lisa Trumbull and Dr. Steve Schutzer. Lisa Trumbull is the CEO of Sowen Health, Southern New England Healthcare Organization, a physician-led clinically integrated delivery system in Connecticut and Massachusetts. Dr. Steve Schutzer, a nationally renowned arthroplasty surgeon, is one of the founders of MTVA and is the co-founder and president of Upswing Health. Our special guest today, Stacey Richter, is no stranger to podcasting. Stacey is co-president of Aventria Health Group and QC Health and the host of Relentless Health Value, an award-winning podcast about healthcare value. Relentless Health Value is one of the most listened to podcasts, and the show was voted #1 healthcare podcast by the Advisory Board, a top consultancy for healthcare executives. For more than 20 years, Stacey has innovated better coordinated health solutions, benefiting all stakeholders, and most of all, patients. Last year, the Validation Institute awarded Stacey the Influencer of the Year award. We're honored to have Stacey join us today to discuss the current state of the movement to value in healthcare. Welcome to Moving to Value Unscripted, Stacey.
It is such a pleasure to be here. Thanks so much for having me. And thanks also for the amazing work that the MTVA is doing, helping employers around the country and in Connecticut get better value and patients get better affordable healthcare.
Well, thank you so much for saying that, Stacey. And I know you're used to asking the questions, but today it's our turn. With that in mind, I'm going to kick it off by saying, it's fair to say you're one of the most well-known and respected influencers in the movement to value, the business of healthcare in general. Just give our listeners, if you don't mind, a brief kind of background and really more specifically, what led you to launch Relentless Health Value?
Probably a confluence of things which happened in 25 years, 30 years in this industry. And everybody here has seen any number of those same things. I would just start by saying, though, probably a very formative experience, if that's where we're going. I kind of feel like I'm on the therapist couch. My grandfather had heart failure. We can begin there, I think. Grandpa had heart failure. There's doctors, clinicians that are listening. But for anyone who hasn't seen a loved one get a heart failure exacerbation, it's like watching grandpa get waterboarded. I mean, can't breathe. It's a horrible thing. So went to the ER one time when I was a teenager with grandma and grandpa. We walk in the front door, we get triage. They want to put my grandpa in one of the exam rooms. Grandma puts her foot down. She does not want to go in that particular exam room. The TV is on the fritz in that one. They had been in that ER so many times that grandma is familiar with the pros and cons of the various exam rooms, right? So we go in, grandpa gets admitted, he gets the hospital-acquired dementia, he's frail elderly, so he gets the muscle wasting. He gets discharged a couple of days later. It's kind of like, don't let the door hit you in the butt on the way out to the parking lot, old man. I don't know if his PCP even knew he had been there. Nothing is different.
Probably not.
Right? It's not like his therapy got changed or anything like that. So sure enough, he's back the next month. Right? You watch that happen and you watch a loved one die what amounted to a terrible death. And then you read a stat 1% of heart failure patients in this country are actually on optimal medical therapy. And you start realizing that the bar is pretty low here. There's a lot of amazing stuff that's going on. So I don't want to be entirely cynical. And there's a lot of good work that's going on. And there's a lot of momentum that's happening. But there's so many places where the bar is so low that it is inspirational to start to continue the good that can be done here.
And no one's going to argue with you there. Everyone in this call certainly not only has our own personal experiences, but we all obviously know that the opportunities to do better abound. And we all have glimmers of it around the country. And you've been privileged to, interview some of the folks that actually are making a difference. Thank you for sharing that.
you should ask me now why.
Go ahead. Go ahead. See, the podcaster is coming out of you.
You should ask me why I continue to be in healthcare so many years later.
So, Stacey, why do you continue to be in healthcare so many years later?
Well, let me tell you, John, that's an amazing question. I have gone to several summits, physician summits, and talked to people who also went to physician summits. And I saw physicians stand up in front of the room, very proud, because the whole heart failure thing, it's not like it's a giant mystery. Like, there are care pathways. There are plenty of very well proven ways that you keep heart failure patients out of the ER, right? So went to multiple summits, have heard of others who went to multiple summits, have seen the white paper. I am sure Lisa Trumbull's group has done amazing work keeping heart failure patients. Like, there are precedents here for how this works, right? So physician stands up in front of a summit and goes through this whole program that had rolled out at his very large health center to keep patients out of the ER. I march up to this doc after the summit and I say, wow, that's amazing. How's it going? Are you expanding the program? What is going on there? And he looks at me sheepishly with despair in his eyes and says, the program got shut down. It got shut down.
Why?
Because it keeps patients out of the hospital.
I was actually talking to someone, an anonymous source recently, who was telling me that he had attended a meeting led by the CFO of a large health system. And the CFO, I mean, quiet part out loud, right? It was standing up in front of the room with a whiteboard talking about optimizing heart failure readmissions. Like, we don't want it to go to zero. Like, so what we got to do is we got to stop the non-profitable ones. We got to take the CMS fine into consideration. So we got to keep enough of the profitable ones. So, like, here's who we want to get readmitted and here's who we don't want to get readmitted. And, you know, like, you hear stuff like that. And that is something that needs to get said out loud, right? That is something that needs to be brought to the light so that those who are mission driven understand what the real world actually looks like. Because if we're going to fix this thing, we need to understand what we're.
I'd be lying, Stacey, if I said I never heard that myself. So it's certainly a truism. Lisa?
I was going to say it doesn't surprise me, right? There's a lot of profit motivation in healthcare, and I've said a number of times, and I think you've said it, Stacey, follow the money. You know, just follow the money. Who has it? Who doesn't have it? And why do they have it, right? And why aren't they improving the care of the populations that they're serving? Because it's certainly not getting any better, even though they have all this profit. And so it's interesting to hear this. And we're on a Moving to Value Alliance podcast. And so we all kind of breathe and drink the water and the Kool-Aid, right? Believing that value-based care is one aspect for correcting what's happening in our healthcare industry. But you know, I hear others saying, oh, value-based care is dead. That's not going to happen. You know, it's not going to go anywhere. We're not going to make any material progress. And I'm wondering what you think, having had conversations with people across the country about healthcare. What do you see? What do you hear? And do you believe that this has a chance of having an impact in the future?
Short answer, yes. I do believe that it has the chance of having an impact. However, I think we need to be really clear that every good word gets co-opted and value is no exception. You ask 100 people what value-based care means and you'll get 105 answers. And that couldn't be more true. And what's starting to happen, unfortunately, is that carriers, others, people selling to employers have started to use the value-based word. And it's like value-based jazz hands. You know, like there's friends of mine who evaluate their contracts. And if they see value-based, like they see the word value on any contract that they're handed from their TPA or carrier, they cross it off. Like it's their superpower. They just eagle eyes on that and they cross it off. Because when it's part of the PEPM, again, if you follow the dollar, what you see from the employer standpoint is that they are getting charged an upcharge. If it's in the PEPM, per employee per month charge, who's getting that money? Where's it going? Well, the carrier's getting some of it for administrative purposes, right? Obviously. But then the rest of it, a lot of times, if you look at where that employer's members are actually getting care, those entities may or may not. I mean, they may be, right? But there are enough instances where somebody else is actually getting the money, like the big consolidated healthcare system around the corner that doesn't have very many of the plan members going there, but that the carrier writ large wants to make nicey nice with. Right. So somebody's taking money. And again, is it value? If the dollars are getting extracted from the employers and going someplace other than their members are getting care. The other thing that the term value-based programs or whatever shows up in employer contracts is in the billable codes. Like there's an upcharge, 3.5%, something like that, right? It gets added to every single claim, which are fee for service, by the way. So it's kind of interesting that value-based care gets paid for by fee for service volume. But again, where are those dollars going? Did they actually buy anything of that? Like, how do I audit that? Like, okay, so I just paid however many dollars, if you add it all up, for value-based care. Is it capitated? Did my members get anything for it? How much money did I pay? All of these things are questions. Like, do I get it back if my members are showing up once a month for heart failure readmissions? Right? Like, but then the problem becomes if people are actually really doing good work, it's almost like you need another name for it.
Well said that the value term has been co-opted. Absolutely. You're absolutely right on that. No doubt about it.
Yeah, John and I got our original learning from the Harvard Business School, and their definition of value worked very well for me. It's outcomes that matter over the true cost. And for an orthopedic surgeon with very left brain kind of dominance, it made sense. What are the outcomes that matter to this patient or that patient over the true cost? And you use TDABC analysis and so forth. So when I hear about there's so much confusion about value, I just say, why can't we just all agree that that's what healthcare value should be? It's really kind of that easy. It's gotten bastardized and so forth. But my question is, you and I were just at Rosetta Fest, and it was so much fun, Stacey, being in a room with 1,000 people that think the same way. And thinking back a couple of years ago when you were on the panel that I ran with Chris, Deacon, yourself, and Cara, we talked a lot about collaboration. And that was one of the takeaways from Rosetta Fest was this willingness to collaborate, join forces, roll up, and advance the value mission. So just curious, from all of your experiences, where do you think that's going to come? Where's most of the collaboration going to roll up and start to accelerate? Because we do have to have an impact, and we're running out of time.
I think it is a beautiful thing when you're in a room with 1,000 people who all understand the assignment. Like there's something that is inherently powerful about that. It will take a village. It will take a village. And to have mission-driven people within the system, outside of the system, who are all pushing in the same direction. Patients even really informed patients. Like the Malcolm Gladwell book says it takes 12% of a population to have a tipping point. So I firmly believe that when enough people begin to push in the same direction, when the reputational damage starts to happen from people who are overly putting profits over patients in really obvious and unpalatable ways, that's when things start to change. It's a small amount of individuals that actually can move a market. And I am optimistic that we're starting to reach the point where there's enough people that are informed and have eyes on that at least the most egregious, I'm going to call them games, stop being feasible.
I keep hoping and praying for that, what you've just said. And when I was younger and I kept hearing about this movement to value, I was like, oh yeah, right. I'll believe it when I see it. And then all of a sudden I kind of had an inkling, probably 5-10 years ago. I said, oh, I'm starting to see it. And here we are, a decade later. I'm like, oh, really? So I guess just to pick up on that comment, Stacey, where is that 12.5% going to come from? Is it the government? Is it employers? Is it health systems? Is it employees? We're starting to see litigation for employees against their employer. Is it patients, or is it a little bit of all of that?
I think it has to be a little bit of all of that. If there's too many eggs in any one of those baskets, it's just not going to work. Like you think about even legislation. Well, legislation only happens when there's a riled up constituency, so like it has to be a flywheel. It has to be. Employers aren't going to start paying attention unless there's enough members, employees who are complaining when they start realizing that actually, if we do want retention and we do want to achieve our business goals, we have to be doing this. If we want to remain profitable, we can't just be giving away money, while at the same time, we do have an opportunity to help employees and feel responsible for employees. Like that's all possible. And therefore, right, like that wheel starts to spin. I feel like it's a choice in a way to be pessimistic or optimistic. That change is slow until it's really fast. That's how it always works. And also there are regions of the country, like if you look at things nationally, it always looks very mixed bag. But if you look at local markets, which is actually where healthcare happens and also where change happens, and you start looking at what's going on in some of these more forward-thinking places, it is actually inspiring, and there's real stuff going on.
When you think about the amount of concerted effort we would need from all of the various constituents to make a change, I couldn't help but think, are we all just a bunch of chickens, right? Everybody's complaining about it in almost every aspect of business these days, right? It's the employer, it's the health plan, it's the health system, it's the providers, it's the state and the feds, and the list goes on. Everybody's complaining about it. But yet no one has the intestinal fortitude to actually get anything done. And it's going to drown this country. So you have to say, is it going to take a massive failure of the system in some way before someone has enough courage to actually step up and try to institute change? Because asking to change from within when the motivations are profit or the incentives aren't aligned doesn't really get the job done. And I kind of wonder if you see it that way, right? Is it really going to take a massive failure for this to get looked at?
There is a grievance industrial complex, right? Everybody loves to complain, like it is the simplest thing to do to finger wag somebody else. And it's also a strategy. Pharma and PBMs fighting with each other and blaming each other, like it creates confusion. It sows doubt, and you confuse them, you lose them. Same thing with hospitals. Complaining is a strategy to not look inward and to deflect. I like how G-By puts it. There's no angels and there's no devils in healthcare. There isn't. First of all, taking things at the stakeholder level, like saying carriers, like they're all the same, or hospitals, and throwing them all in some gigantic grouping is just incorrect. And what it does is it lumps the people trying to do right and well in the same bucket as people not doing right and well at the organizational level. And that isn't helpful for anyone. I'm more and more giving the stink eye to anything that I see, which lumps huge organizations into one bucket, number one. But then also organizations themselves are not homogenous blobs. And I've said this many times, like you can't just say like everybody at this hospital system took a democratic vote and decided to sue low-income patients, right? Like, so I think it's also really important to not go there either, because then you have someone who's trying really hard in the belly of the beast to do right, and who is constantly getting smacked down by being labeled with a label that they don't deserve when they're literally going against the tide to their own probably personal detriment to try to do the right thing. So I think one of the things that really needs to start here is to recognize that just because we don't like someone's employer doesn't mean that we have to point fingers in their face, number one. And number two, we need to figure out a way to let those organizations who really are trying to do right by patients, give them the opportunity to shine by not yanking them into some kind of bucket that for some reason or another we've decided that we don't like. None of that is productive, I think.
Stacey, you bring up a good point. Years ago, I read a book, maybe you've heard of it too, Who Killed Healthcare by Reggie Herzlinger. After reading the book, the conclusion was we all did, right? All
Right.
stakeholders have had their finger in it. And Marty's last book, The Price We Paid, really came to the same conclusion. Orthopedic surgeons complaining about The insurance companies cutting them back in blind
All
spot.
right. He's got a new book, Steve. You're behind. You got to
I
listen to
know I
Stacey.
got a signed copy.
Stacey's podcast, number 449, I think.
Oh, I know. I definitely listened to that, but I think it's a systemic problem, Stacey, isn't it? It's got to be blown up and start over. But those of us with the MTVA and yourself, we're optimists. We live for bright spots because if you didn't find them, you get depressed. You'd be on Prozac or something, right? Bright spots now are the CAA that seems to be kicking into gear. Doug Aldine wrote yesterday, if you can't legislate or regulate, litigate. I love that. I mean, suddenly plaintiff lawyers are our allies here. But the other one that we saw highlighted that I've become really enamored with is the whole DPC movement, direct primary care, which, 4 years ago, I looked at them and I thought, they're kind of like concierge docs, but are they going to really step up and play in the big sphere? And they seem to be. So, I mean, some of them are taking risks, they're setting up on-site, near-site clinics, because think of it this way. The employers are paying $70 to $100 PMPM because commercial insurance doesn't work, right? And sooner they're going to say, well, I'm paying $100 PMPM to keep my patient healthy. What am I paying the $18,000 for? For nothing. So what are your thoughts on DPC? And you think they're going to be a player in terms of the big solution?
I am a fan of trying to figure out how to get citizens of this country primary care and access to primary care. So anything to that end, I am going to support, because you don't have to go far to find some pretty unimpeachable evidence that suggests that patients with access to primary care do a whole lot better, and total cost of care is reduced and life is better and healthier. So anything to that end, I support. I feel like with DPC, there are, just like anything, there's great ones, there's not so great ones. So I hesitate to kind of lump everybody who's in that cohort together. One of the more interesting things that is going on with advanced primary care, direct primary care, holistic primary care, whatever we want to call it, and those are not to be conflated, by the way, just in case anyone's listening, right? But good primary care, maybe I'll say as my
No,
catch-all.
that's the key. Good primary care. I'm glad you added that. It's true.
So some interesting things with good primary care are their ability to steer to specialists with appropriate practice patterns. So there's a lot of other really good things that are going on there. I'm just kind of pointing out a couple that I find particularly interesting, and that is their ability to steer. And actually, when Marty McCary was on the pod, also Will Schrank talked about this too, Dr. Will Schrank, that there are actually specialists who are scratching their chins asking why they're getting so many fewer referrals. And it's because there was practice pattern, appropriate practice pattern data that showed that these particular physicians were outliers in how they were practicing, doing stuff like putting hardware in lower backs at a really high rates, or just Mohs surgery was another one with dermatologists. Like if the average is 2 slices or something for Mohs surgery and someone's doing like 9, these aren't debatable, right? Like there are obviously things that are done where profits are being put over patients. And with primary care, like everybody talks about, how do we navigate? How do we do this? Primary care is uniquely situated. This is why they get bought by consolidated health entities, right? Because they become a referral engine. Right. But same thing can also hold true for primary care that has enough data to steer to specialists. And if that takes hold, you can start seeing a flywheel develop there, yeah, which I think is fascinating, actually.
Yeah, I think that's true, Stacey. At least I believe this. Gone are the days where you needed to be in a captured system of some sort to gain referrals, right? Now, for those entities that are engaged in value-based care, direct primary care, whatever alphabet soup flavor you can think of, the importance of understanding who the high-performing specialists, hospitals, and whatever else you have are, it becomes really critical to being successful. And, the key for specialists at that point, and hospitals and the like, is to be at the top of their game. The best on quality, the best on cost of care, the best with experience. And it would be good to see that paradigm change in a more material way, because then I think we would get some reaction in the industry with people scratching their heads going, why is this happening to me? And they might get on the bandwagon and patients will benefit. I think one of the things that I find a little scary, and I'm interested in your thoughts on this, is that McKinsey recently published a study where they outlined about 35% of practicing physicians anticipate leaving the industry in the next 5 years. And we already have problems with access. So to me, I look at this issue and I say, oh my God, if we all of a sudden have this a little bit of a beginning of a sea change for value-based care at the time that we have massive amounts of people leaving the industry, we're not going to be able to do it. And it's going to get worse. I see attention to the value-based component of this, but I don't see attention to, how are we going to backfill and make it easier for physicians in particular to do their work, but also to be able to replenish those that are retiring or that are leaving or that don't want to do it anymore. And this study said it's not 35% of the retiring age providers, it's 35% of all providers, which is kind of scary. So that means even the younger ones that aren't close to retirement age.
So I think that is a really, really important point. And I'm going to start by backtracking to the conversation that we just had about PCPs referring to specialists who have demonstrated that they are superior. If I put myself in the shoes of a specialist, and there's two on this call, so this is a little bit of a dicey move on my part.
Go for it.
I didn't say that. Let's wait. I'm waiting to hear it. Go ahead.
You're waiting. If I put myself in the shoes of a specialist, like, for example, Dr. John Rodas, who invested time, money, effort into improving patient safety. If I put myself into the shoes of a specialist, they are inherently motivated to do better by patients, and then no one is noticing or referring. There is no reward at all. Like, basically trying to figure out how to make a sustainable business model. And I can't even get an increase in FFS referrals to pay that off. Who's going to quit? Right? So some of the stuff that we're talking about here, like, for example, having adequate primary care, makes downstream lives a lot nicer. Also getting Goldilocks referrals, as I've heard Dr. John Rhoda say any number of times, right? Like, patients you actually can help. So if we're thinking about how do we keep specialists working, stuff like that actually is not only improves patients, but I'm sure it's got net promoter scores that are positive for the clinicians in this mix as well. So that would be the first thing I would say. The second thing I would say is that, a lot of times people point to technology and they finger wag technology. We have some EHRs, same system, same everything. Some of them were installed and it takes 60 plus clicks to order a Tylenol.
Yeah.
There are others it takes 2. Same EHR system. It's just the way that it was installed. So, who was the gang that configured this thing so that one of our most precious resources, human resources, is sitting around clicking 60 times to order a Tylenol, or doing pajama time, or doing all of these things? Like, it's not the tech. It's the processes, it's the people, it's how they were. Who decided that we're going to try to track 150 quality measures in the most labor intensive way possible, and that's going to fall on the back of doctors? I really think that right now it's an operational issue. It's a who's doing what issue. It's a process issue. Anytime I hear something like that, I'm like, that's not exactly what I would consider operational excellence. And it might take an exodus for hospitals and anybody who employs doctors and other clinicians. Nurses too, right, are easily in this mix, as are other clinicians. I need to include like physician assistants, social, like there's a whole group there that everything is flowing downhill and winding up on their shoulders. So it is a bit of a wake-up call right now. And I do feel like there is competitive advantage for those healthcare organizations who have operational excellence, who have technology, who are actually mission-driven, have values that are aligned with the values of the people that are working there. If we're talking about a staffing war, I really, truly believe people aren't leaving because they hate medicine. They're leaving because they hate the situation that they're in.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's probably all true. No doubt there's a lot of opportunities for improving efficiency to your point. And, Stacey, it's actually a little bit worse. It's worse than you think because I've done now 4, I think, installs of computer systems in hospitals I've worked at. One first from paper to computer, and then from computer to a different system, and then 2 other installs. And actually within the systems, there's somebody who can order the download with 2 clicks, but there's also people who still need the 20 clicks because we're not all trained appropriately, and everybody, of course, has a different learning curve where he puts the effort and time into it. So the variability there is at the micro level within a system is tremendous. Of course, at the macro system, we all appreciate this tremendous variability. So, and I think those folks that are quitting, that Lisa's alluding to, might be the ones actually who are taking the 20 clicks because they're getting really, really frustrated earlier. So it might not be all bad, but I do think also, and I'm glad you added nurses, nurse practitioners, PAs to the mix because I do firmly believe that doctors alone aren't going to be the solution. There's probably going to be some tech component to improve efficiency. I do think nurse practitioners and PAs are probably going to be an important part of this going forward because there's just not enough doctors to fill the gap. And I was giving a lecture yesterday to medical students here in Connecticut, and I'm just reminded that we still need to change medical education to teach kids in school about this stuff that we're talking about, because I would pretty much say nobody learns anything about the economics of healthcare. Nobody learns anything about the economics of the cost of the care we deliver. And certainly nobody learns anything about, what value-based healthcare is. So we still have a huge opportunity, I think, from the front end to get folks engaged in this earlier on. It's challenging though. Stacey, let me shift gears if I can for a minute. You're also, and as I said in the intro, you also started a company called QC Health, so-called Benefit Corp. And could you just tell our listeners a little bit about, why you started QC Health and what exactly does it do?
So thank you, John, who is our independent director over at QC Health. So
Full disclosure.
full disclosure. So QC Health is a public benefit corp, which I'm increasingly intrigued by, this idea of a public benefit corp. And there are a number of other organizations, companies in the healthcare space that are starting as public benefit corps, because with a public benefit corp, you actually have a fiduciary obligation just like normal, but you also must achieve a mission. Like that is actually part of the gig. I wanted to open up a public benefit corp because I think a lot of healthcare businesses should be one.
Makes sense.
So
That's
there's
perfect.
that. QC Health in particular, our goal is to help improve patient outcomes. And I'm going to just say ruthlessly practical ways. How do we help align stakeholders so that we can run programs that ultimately fill gaps in patient journeys that remain unfilled because there's kind of, in a lot of times, no direct profit motive for anybody to fill that gap. I'm saying the quiet part out loud, but if you look at a lot of patient journeys, unless there is a profit and loss equation associated with that care gap, sometimes even if there is a profit and loss equation associated with that care gap, it remains unfilled for whatever reason. But there's so many places where you can really see patients falling through cracks, and not many have their eyes on it. And just given the full scope of our team, including Dr. John Rodas, we feel like we have enough of a survey of the entire industry, and we understand what various entities are doing and what their vested interests are, that we can put the puzzle pieces together and fill those gaps in interesting ways.
Yeah. Boy, could you imagine pivoting the book of payers to a public benefit corp? Sorry.
Sorry to laugh out loud. Yeah.
I know. It's I just go back to primary care for a minute because I, like you, Stacey, I'm sure Lisa and John too, we really do believe that we need a Copernican revolution, basically, where primary care is reminded that the only service line where additional support yields better outcomes is primary care. It's not orthopedics, it's not dermatology, it's primary care. And there are 3 categories of primary care that I think of. I think of the typical fee-for-service, but private primary care. Then there are the employed primary care docs. And then there are these independent, whether they're APCs or VPCs or direct primary care. And one thing I've sensed, Stacey, over the years with my company is we do network with various primary care groups to co-manage their patients' orthopedic problems is that they tend to be happy, right? That's the first thing I ask their docs. Are you guys happy? Are you folks happy? And they are taking care of patients. They don't hear the damn word. I remember Professor Porter saying when he hears RVU, he turns around and runs away the other direction. I mean, you remember he said that, John?
Yeah.
RVU, turn around.
It's an oxymoron, the whole thing, relative value. If you're just thinking about it, it's like, really?
And we heard from Brian the other day, Stacey, about the ruck. It was a zero sum. Primary care docs got screwed and the specialists were bonus and so forth. But I do think there's going to be a resurgence in primary care when there's a little bit of equalization in terms of income and when primary care docs are really paid to take care of people and get them well. I mean, I was a primary care doc years ago, and I would have loved, I just like working with my hands, but think about that, how wonderful that is to get compensated reasonably for your outcomes that really impact a family. We can just hope, right?
Yeah, it's very cognitive also.
Very
Like there's a lot of cognitive services, and a big problem with the healthcare industry as it currently stands is that cognitive services are just not compensated. Just funny to say, considering that everywhere else that we have, in air quotes, a knowledge economy, but primary care, which requires so much mental astuteness, is the one place where it's not valued.
Yeah, not just mental astuteness, but emotional astuteness. And I think, everybody who's in medical school should read the books that Steve and I read a long time ago, Nudge and Switch, because a lot of this all comes down to behavioral economics and getting people to change their behavior. And, we've for years recorded things like, do you smoke? Check the box, as president of the hospital. That was a measure we had, right? Oh, yeah, we document. And I say to my team, has anybody ever stopped smoking that we take care of? Do we ever spend any time with them and say, hey, you really shouldn't smoke. This is why you shouldn't smoke. Are you interested in stopping smoking? Here are things we could do. No, we record we check the box because that's the measure. And, my daughter's a nurse practitioner. Yesterday, she told me a story, an anecdote about a patient of hers who was overweight, the classic, hypertension, diabetes, hyperlipidemia. And she's been spending some time with him talking about the trajectory of his life if he kept going. And he came in the other day so happy and excited. He's lost weight. He's exercising regularly. He's changed his diet. His blood pressure's down. This person's in their mid-40s. I really think, and I said, you've changed the outcome of that person's life, if assuming he can continue on that path. But, you got to be motivated to spend that extra time. You have to have the time. I think when I tell this story, most primary care providers say, oh, who's got the time for that? Meanwhile, you're going to spend all the time taking care of their hypertension, diabetes, hyperlipidemia later. Why don't you spend a little time up front, right? So I hear those stories. I'm thinking, oh, maybe there's hope, but we got to really change a little bit of how we do it. I think Lisa, I think I think your docs do a great job in this space.
Yeah, the behavior modification is difficult. It's time consuming. I would put behavioral health in the same category as primary care, because half the battle is figuring out how to motivate people to do something different or how to get them from one place to another. And if there's a behavioral health condition that's present at the time that you're trying to talk to someone about their COPD and their cholesterol and all that, there's no chance that that's going to get better without understanding the behavioral health piece. So I almost feel like primary care and behavioral health go hand in hand. And those are the two most needed specialties to really impact the cost and the quality continuum. And like you said, Steve, they're the worst paid in the industry. But, I think that there is clearly, bodies that are recognizing that this is a problem, and we need to figure out how to pivot our payment system to put the money where it needs to be in order to improve the cost and quality.
I'm seeing more and more, which I find really exciting. I mean, first of all, there's a lot of employers, self-insured employers, who are recognizing the importance of primary care and recognizing the importance of fixing the financial incentives there and doing real whole person care. Elizabeth Mitchell talks about that a lot on a recent pod. But also I'm hearing more and more about just this idea of a community funding primary care. Like, you've got the police department, you've got the fire department.
Yeah.
Why don't you have a primary care department, right? Because then all of a sudden the incentives are very, very aligned with what the needs are of the community.
That makes a lot of sense.
Public health was supposed to be to a certain extent, right? And if you look back at the trajectory of healthcare back to, let's say, the in air quotes, as you would say, Stacey, the Marcus Welby days, right? It was a community effort to care for people in your community. And we've just gotten away from that. We systematized everything and we pulled it out of the community, centralized resources, and now there's not enough money to put back in the community. What's everybody say we need? We need health literacy, we need housing, we need food, we need access to pharmacies. And that's a community response. But right now, it's all falling on the healthcare system to fix it. And the healthcare system can't fix its own direct care problems, never mind community issues. I'm not saying that there isn't good work being done across the country to impact this. I know we're trying to do our best to impact it, but it really is going to take the village, the village of our country to be able to make some determinations to really put the infrastructure in place to address those issues.
Lisa, Mike Fine did that in Situate, Rhode Island 20 years ago. Really amazing. Well, Stacey, it's been a great 45 minutes. We were very excited to have you on. And we typically, as we wrap up the podcast, ask our guests to put on their blue sky futuristic thinking, because, gosh, we've been wrong a number of times. But seriously, Stacey, what would you think the next 3 to 5 years it's going to look like healthcare in the United States?
This is what I would predict. I would predict that there are going to be local markets that make great headway. There's going to be other local markets where the existing entrenched players further entrench and they try to maximize their profits while they still can, because why wouldn't they? So you're going to have these countervailing forces that it's going to be skirmishes across the country in different parts of the business. Like you've got what's going on in pharmacy, you've got what's going on in medical care. I do feel like ultimately we have hit a point where 48% of commercially insured Americans are delaying or foregoing care due to cost. We are hitting a point where 41% of Americans have medical debt. Like always in the past, we've always heard, oh, can't go any higher, healthcare prices can't go any higher. I think we're actually getting to the point. Zach Cooper just came out with that study that showed for every percentage increase in hospital prices, payroll in that same region declines. It's not going to be kind of this broad stroke across the country. Now suddenly, ... Like that is probably not going to happen. But I do feel like there is going to be success stories that start to push forward and lessons that can be learned from them so that this wave starts to take form.
That's great.
Well, Stacey, as they say, from your mouth to God's ears, my friend. Thank you so much for joining us today. Like I said, you're more used to being the one asking the questions, but you did a great job and we really appreciate it. And Lisa and Steve, thank you so much. Have a great day.
Thank you so much for having me.
It was fun to talk to you again. Fun to have a conversation.
We want to take a minute now to introduce the new MTVA membership program. As a 501c3 nonprofit, we rely on support from our grassroots network to advance our mission of creating a value-based health system with high-quality patient outcomes at a reasonable cost. As we continue to grow and broaden our impact, we're excited to invite like-minded organizations and individuals to join our membership program. We're proud to offer 2 membership models, Ally Member and Trade Member. Tax-deductible membership contributions help us enrich the healthcare environment with quality content, including this podcast, and robust platforms to fuel discussion, collaboration, and advocacy that lead to groundbreaking solutions. For more information, including a full list of benefits offered, visit our website at www.movingtovalue.org/trade-member. The link is also in the episode description. Thanks again for listening and for being part of this important movement.